Hello, everyone, and welcome back to St. Jacobus Lutheran Church here in Woodside. This is Pastor Joe, and we continue our Read Up to the Ascension, a 40-day journey through the Gospel of Luke. Today is day 14, and we look at Luke chapter 7, the section pertaining to John the Baptist, and sort of a follow-up and a conversation through messengers between John, who is in prison, and Jesus, who has begun his public ministry and has started to gain a great deal of attention and fame and knowledge. As we see in the story, John's imprisonment is not terrible. He has free access to messengers and disciples, and he's able to communicate with the outside and things like that. And we sort of, hearing what we heard in the first two chapters of Luke about John the Baptist being the one who would prepare the way of the Lord, who would make announcements, who would call people to repentance and baptism and change and get them ready for God's inbreaking of love, grace, power, and salvation into the world. So we would expect John to have a different reaction and question than he does. So I'm gonna read Luke chapter 7, beginning with verse 18 and going to verse 36. Now keep in mind, yesterday we looked at Jesus doing these two tremendous works of power. One, restoring wellness to a slave or servant of a centurion, a outreach to a complete outsider, albeit one who has done tremendous acts of good for the community. And the second act was raising from the dead the son of the widow in Nain, restoring life to this young man and restoring life to his mother, allowing her to continue to participate in and be part of society and be cared for. So after these two acts, we start today's reading. So this is Luke chapter 7, beginning with verse 18 and going to verse 36. The disciples of John reported all these things to him. So John summoned two of his disciples and sent them to the Lord to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" When the men had come to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to you to ask, 'Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?'" Jesus had just cured many people of diseases, plagues, and evil spirits, and had given sight to many who were blind. And Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have good news brought to them, and blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." When John's messengers had gone, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who put on fine clothing and live in luxury are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. John is the one about whom it was written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' I tell you, among those born of women, no one is greater than John. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." And all the people who heard this, including the tax collectors, acknowledged the justice of God, because they had been baptized with John's baptism. But by refusing to be baptized by him, the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected God's purpose for themselves. "To what then will I compare the people of this generation? And what are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another, 'We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not weep.' For John the Baptist had come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Nevertheless, wisdom is vindicated by all her children. The word of the Lord. So, as I talked about a little bit before the reading, hearing the background of John the Baptist, this miraculous announcement to Zachariah and Elizabeth that their child would be destined for greatness, that he would be the one the prophets and Isaiah foresaw who would prepare the way of the Lord, the one who would make straight his paths, the one who would prepare the world for God's inbreaking. You would think, witnessing the things that Jesus was doing, healing the sick, restoring sight to the blind, casting out demons, and in acknowledgement of the importance of the poor and the excluded and the ignored, one of the signs of the Messiah is also this bringing good news to the poor and recognizing them as children of God and worthy of the same grace, love, forgiveness, and joy and peace that everyone else receives. So John doesn't say, this is so great, I have seen these things fulfilled. When Jesus is presented in the temple, some of the prophets and the people there proclaim, Simeon in particular proclaims, I have seen God's promises fulfilled in the birth of this child. John from prison doesn't say that. John is got this passive-aggressive kind of question about, are you the one who is to come? Are you the Messiah? Are you the one I've prepared the way for? Or should I start looking for someone else? And we don't really get a sense as to why John has these questions. John is always lifted up as this sign of great faith, great strength, commitment to living in the wilderness, eating nothing but some wild fruit and bugs. Somebody who has this great following but is not using it for any monetary gain or financial gain or worldly power. And we wonder what happened with John. He's imprisoned because he's been very publicly criticizing King Herod for marrying his brother's wife. And John does not relent at this criticism of this violation of the law being broadcast to the world every day, every minute, every hour that they spend together. So John's in prison, but he's still able to communicate with his disciples and teach and stay in touch with people and things like that. So you get the sense that nobody's guarding him too tightly. And John asks this question about Jesus. And Jesus' response is just telling John what he knows already. Perhaps Jesus' ministry is going in a different direction than John expected. Perhaps John expected more of a focus on the people of Israel. Perhaps John expected more of a military, royal king. Perhaps John was anticipating different activities or actions. But whatever John's reason for this question, Jesus' response is telling him something he knows already. Look at what's being done. You've heard the reports. Your disciples have told you. You've witnessed these things. You know what's going on. And Jesus just reminds John of the faith that took him that far through life, reminding John, much like he announced, God is doing something new and different in the world. This might not be what you wanted or expected, but this is the moment God has prepared for the salvation of the world. I am the one you've prepared the way for. Now, after talking with John's followers, Jesus shares almost a eulogy for John, Soon, King Herod will basically be tricked into beheading John. But right now, Jesus sort of shares almost like a eulogy, celebrating and lifting up what John has accomplished, taking ownership of being the one John has prepared the way for, and also using this as a moment to criticize the religious authorities and all those who were stubborn. People who just won't admit, I'm fine with the way things are right now. I'm comfortable, I'm in charge, I have the power, I'm not going to lose all that. Because Jesus highlights that the religious authorities looked at John and criticized him for being too ascetic, too sacrificing, too much, and not eating and refraining from drinking and doing all this stuff that was extreme and hard for anybody to emulate or even try to emulate. And then they attacked Jesus for doing the opposite, for eating and drinking, for gathering with people and tax collectors and sinners and doing all these activities that they thought John should do. Jesus, again, tries to call everybody to faith, even those religious authorities that have been attacking him and criticizing him and attacking John and dismissing all the things that they're doing. People that watched Jesus heal a man with the withered hand who could not participate in society, to fully restore him and bring him back to health and wellness as this testament to God's power and God's love and God's care and God's concern for us. They watch Jesus do this act, and then they say, you're not supposed to heal on the Sabbath. They watch Jesus do these incredible signs of power, and then they revert back to some petty criticism of some perceived violation. And here, as Jesus early celebrates the life of John the Baptist and what he has done, Jesus is also again trying to break through to these stubborn hearts. Jesus is trying to break through to these authorities and remind them, hey, there's something bigger than your traditions and your creeds and your power and your authority going on here and now. Why don't you open your eyes and see this? As much as Jesus was able to restore sight to literally blind people, he again and again struggles to call people who are blinded to what God is doing. We get the sense that John himself is kind of teetering on that line, perhaps looking over and going, I see all these signs of the Messiah, but my expectation was that the Messiah would be doing this as well, or would have, whatever it is. But we sort of, as Jesus celebrates John, we are reminded that John faithfully does complete his work. Jesus' ministry is in full swing now, and John has done what he was born and set aside to do, to prepare the way of the Lord, to help get people ready for what God is doing in the world through Jesus. So tomorrow, our sermon's going to be part of our Zoom church service. If you're interested in joining us for that, you can find the link or information on Facebook, or shoot me a message. And tomorrow we look at another deeply personal encounter that Jesus has with a woman who cares for him, and the reaction of the people around them. So come back tomorrow, and like I said, I hope to see you at Zoom Church. Take care, everybody.